Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren, you may also call me Lo, and today's video is my November wrap-up, or all of the books that I read in November. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing well. Before I get started, I just want to say that I am doing a giveaway on my Twitter account, so you can go ahead and find that giveaway pinned at the top of my Twitter. The link is in my description, and you can enter for the chance to win 2 free books. So, starting with my usual stats, I read a total of 9 books and 3,461 pages, which is a lot more than normal. I usually barely hit 3,000, so I did really well. Of those pages, 1,987 pages were from listening to audiobooks, and 1,474 pages were from physically reading. The average book length was 385 pages. So I tackled a few longer books this month, which I'm really proud of because I have a really bad habit of just putting off long books that I want to read. And then I get overwhelmed because I have like a lot of very long books on my TBR. So I'm happy I tackled at least a few of them this month. 6 of the books that I read were adult and 3 were YA. And in terms of genre, I had 3 horror books, 3 thrillers, 2 fantasies, and 1 contemporary. When it comes to ratings, I rated 2 books 3 stars and 6 books 4 stars. And there's 1 book in this video that I won't be rating. So, given that they're only 3 and 4 star books, that means that I recommend everything that I read. 3 stars I'd recommend just to fewer people. 4 stars I'd recommend pretty much to everyone. So it was a good reading month in terms of enjoyment. And 4 stars means I really liked the book, so that's a win. So kicking off this wrap up is a book that it's kind of a random thing that I picked up, and that was In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire, and I read the first 3 books a few years ago, and I don't really remember why I put this on hold on my Libby app, but it did come up and I did read it. This series is basically a novella series, and similar to Nevo's Singing Hills cycle, you can read them out of order and you don't have to read all of them. They just kind of like tangentially surround the same thing. So the first book takes place at this boarding school called Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children. And this school is located in our world, but it's for kids who at some point in their childhood discovered a door to another world and entered another world and lived there for a period of time. For some reason, all of these children returned to the real world, and these worlds that these kids entered are like very tailored to them as people. So usually these worlds are like where these kids want to be. But for some reason, they've been taken back to the real world, and they're all experiencing kind of like sadness and depression because they're not in their worlds anymore, and they're all kind of waiting for another opportunity to enter their door. I gave the first book 4 stars. I thought it was excellent. The rest of the books are a little bit different because each one follows an individual child as they discover their door and enter their world and kind of explore that world. So each one delves into a different world kind of extensively, and some worlds are great and some worlds are not, and everyone has different opinions about the different books. So book 2 I gave 3 stars, and book 3 I gave 1 star, and at that point I was like, I don't think I want to continue this series. It's going downhill for me. I think I'm just gonna stop. For whatever reason, I at some point decided to put a hold on this 4th book on Libby, and I'm so glad I did because I absolutely loved this one. So this book follows Lundy, who is a very serious child. She loves to read and she doesn't really fit in anywhere, and she discovers a door to a world that's based in logic and reason, which I love. The reason that I gave the 3rd book 1 star was because it took place in a like nonsense world, and I just absolutely hated it. So this world I liked a lot more, and this world is the Goblin Market, and it's really rooted in like deception and lies and debts and favors. And I found the world to just be really cozy, but also kind of dark. And I really liked Lundy's character, and I generally just thought this story was beautiful. And if I could read a whole novel that takes place in this world, like, I absolutely would in a heartbeat. So now I'm very compelled to continue this series. I can't tell you if I'll like the other books or not, but now that I gave one 4.5 stars, I will be reading all of them, so stay tuned. The next book I read was an ARC, and it is the sequel to Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan, and this book was Heart of the Sun Warrior. I vlogged my entire reading experience of this book, so I'm not going to talk about this super in-depth, and I'm definitely not going to summarize it because it's a sequel, but definitely check out that vlog. It's spoiler-free if you want kind of in-depth, in real time thoughts. I gave Daughter of the Moon Goddess 4 stars, and in general, I thought that the pacing of this book was a little weird. It felt a little bit stilted, like the problems that our main character was facing were resolved very quickly, and then it was like on to the next problem, and then that was resolved, and it kind of lent the book this like stop and go kind of feeling that I didn't really love. But I thought that the ending of this book was really beautiful, and after spending 2 pretty long books with these characters, I was invested in them and I was feeling things, and I thought the ending again was really, really beautiful. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. The next book I finished is quite the chunker, and that was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. This is a very kind of complex book, so I'm going to do my best to explain it, but bear with me. This is a sapphic gothic adult horror book, and it basically surrounds this boarding school in the early 1900s called the Brookhants School for Girls. And in the early 1900s, there were a bunch of kind of mysterious events that occurred at this school, and several girls died somewhat mysteriously. And all of the deaths kind of tangentially surround this memoir that was written at the time by a young woman named Mary McLean, and that was generally controversial, I guess. So we have this past timeline at the time that these girls are dying from the perspective of the headmaster of the school. We also get excerpts from the memoir in this book, as well as a present timeline where basically this Hollywood adaptation of the story of Brookhants in the early 1900s is being filmed. And we're following 2 Hollywood actors who are playing 2 of the girls who died at Brookhants. So we're kind of following the behind the scenes of creating this film and kind of the lives of these actors in present day. All of these things might seem very unrelated, but it all comes together really, really beautifully, and I really enjoyed it. It is long. Like, this book is 617 pages long, and it also contains really beautiful, like, black and white illustrations. Hopefully you can see this. Geez, I'm looking for another one and I can't find one. Here's one. And it's got pages with like all these illustrations, and it's a really beautiful kind of multimedia sort of book. We get some like of the script of the film in here, and it's just a very cool, very unique book that I really enjoyed. The atmosphere in this is top-notch. I fell in love with all the characters. I was very invested in them. The story, I have to say, is quite slow. Like, don't expect a lot of action. It's very character-driven, and it's very much about each of these people as people, if that makes sense. And there isn't a lot of, like, investigation of the mystery of Brookhants. Like, it's not like that. It's more about, again, all the characters. It's got a great gothic atmosphere, especially in the past timeline, and ultimately, like, I was very impressed and really liked this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read, I literally wanted to read for probably 3 or 4 years. Like, since this book came out, I've wanted to read it. I finally acquired it this year, and I finally read it, so I'm very happy about that. And that book is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. As you can probably tell from the title of this book, this is a Gothic novel. It's a horror novel that takes place in Mexico. And we're following Noemi, who is a socialite in Mexico City. So at the beginning of this book, Noemi receives a letter from her cousin, Carolina, who lives at this remote mansion with her husband, who she kind of met and married very quickly. And they haven't heard from her at all until they receive this letter. And Carolina is basically talking about how she feels like she's in danger, and she feels like the walls are talking, and it's like kind of a alarming letter. So Noemi's father sends her to kind of check on her cousin at this house. So Noemi shows up, and immediately this family that lives at this house, her cousin's husband's family, is super weird, and there's weird stuff going on, and it's kind of about Noemi trying to figure out what's going on and trying to sort of rescue her cousin. It's definitely got that like beautiful Gothic atmosphere. I think the atmosphere in this book was honestly top-notch. Super good. Clearly, I love Gothic atmospheres, if that's not obvious already. I really liked this book. I highly recommend it. I did find the plot twist, like the resolution of the mystery, to be a little bit similar to a couple of other books that I read. And in that way, it wasn't as satisfying as I would have wanted. And I can't tell you what books those are because it would kind of spoil this one. But I did ultimately really like it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. The next book that I finished was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. Now, Alex Michaelides also wrote The Silent Patient, which is a very popular thriller. And I was told to read that first because there are Easter eggs for that book in this book. To be honest, they're pretty obvious Easter eggs, like I caught on, even though I haven't read that book, just knowing what that book is about. But I probably should have read that first, but this is the one that I owned, and, you know, things happen. So in this book, we're following Mariana, who is a therapist, and she starts to investigate a couple of murders of girls at this college in Oxford, because one of the girls is the best friend of her niece, who she's very close to. So her niece kind of calls her distraught, and she starts to kind of try to figure out what's going on. She quickly discovers that the girls who died were part of this weird group of girls who basically worship this one professor of Greek mythology named Edward Fosca. And these girls call themselves the Maidens. And it's very weird, and it's very culty, and it's very creepy. So Mariana becomes very suspicious of Edward Fosca and becomes convinced that Edward Fosca is a cult leader / serial killer. This book, I cared about what was going on in this book. Like, I never wanted to put this down, but it definitely had significant issues, in my opinion. The first one is that Mariana becomes very suspicious of Edward Fosca pretty much immediately, and it does make sense to the extent that Edward Fosca is, like, creepy and weird, but she never has evidence that Edward Fosca is guilty, and she kind of builds this case on nothing except the fact that Edward Fosca is weird and that she's like a therapist and somehow like knows that he's guilty just based on his behavior, I guess. My camera died. But I think what I was saying was that I didn't think that Mariana had a very good case against Edward Fosca. And the other thing is that I just found the like twist to be very far out of left field, and I was kind of just like, okay. I just thought it was like kind of unsatisfying. Ultimately, like, I gave this 3 stars. I enjoyed reading it. I don't regret reading it. I'd recommend it, honestly, if you really like Greek mythology. There's a lot of Greek mythology kind of incorporated into this story, but for me it was just kind of middle of the road thriller. The next book that I read is the one that I am not going to rate in this video. I am going to hold it up and tell you that I read it, but that's all you're gonna get because I'm going to talk about this book very, very extensively in an upcoming vlog, so look out for that. That book is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is another book that I had wanted to read for such a long time. So I'm super glad I finally got to it, and I'm very excited for you to get my opinions about this book in that vlog, but it's not gonna happen in this video. The next book, I am not gonna lie, I'm kind of afraid to talk about. I feel like I have a very, very unpopular opinion about this book, but it is what it is. That book is Firekeeper's Daughter by Adrienne Booley. So this is a YA thriller that takes place in this indigenous community in Michigan. And we follow Donis, who I think is either a senior in high school or like is between high school and college. She's like 18. And she becomes the confidential informant in this FBI case. So she's kind of using her presence and like membership in this community to investigate the production and sale of meth in her community. And this kind of meth business has been sort of destroying her community. It's resulted in violence and even death of some people that are close to Donis. And so she's very invested in trying to help her community and trying to solve this case. As a confidential informant, there are a couple of FBI agents that she's working with, and she's just kind of feeding them information that she finds out about this case. I think that in terms of like the cultural value of this book, I think it's excellent. So this book discusses Indigenous and specifically Ojibwe culture and practices and traditions in a way that was very kind of thoughtful but also very informative, and I feel like I learned a lot. And after reading some Own Voices reviews of this book, it sounds like that representation is done in a very, very realistic and, again, like thoughtful way. In that regard, I think that this book is great, and I think that this book is very valuable. However, I had significant frustrations with Donis as a character and also just about this story. So Donis is a very like typical YA character in that she's very not like other girls. She like hates on other girls for doing like girly things. She's very into hockey, and there's that aspect of the book. There's also the fact that Donis is consistently referred to as a genius, but we don't have a lot of evidence that Donis is a genius. All we get is Donis basically like giving us these soliloquies about medical information and medical facts that like I guess is supposed to be impressive that she knows. And she'll also like recite the periodic table sometimes. So I guess that makes her very smart. But in terms of her actions, Donis ignores very, very obvious red flags and very obvious kind of clues in this case. And I was very much like, I'm being told that Donis is a genius, but I'm not seeing it. It was very much like telling, not showing, in terms of that part of Donis. I also felt like Donis held grudges against people for no reason and for way too long, and I just didn't like Donis. I also thought that the story was pretty unrealistic. The FBI isn't hiring 18-year-olds as confidential informants in meth cases. That's just not happening. So I had a hard time with this story. I really did. I never wanted to DNF it, but I definitely had significant, like, eye-rolling moments throughout this entire book. So when I finished this book, I was kind of conflicted about it because I was like, enjoyment-wise, it's probably like a 2.5, 3-star if I'm being generous. But I do think, again, that this book is valuable because of the kind of representation of Indigenous culture and the fact that I learned a lot about Indigenous people through this book. So I ended up bumping up my rating to 3.5, and that's where I landed, and I'm happy with that. But did I love it? No. No. There you go. The next book that I read is honestly another one that I had wanted to read for a very, very, very long time, and I'm so happy that I finally got to it, and that is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I have read one Rory Power book that I can't remember the name of. I will put the cover right here. But I ended up giving that book 3 stars, and I wasn't really very convinced that I would love this one based on that, but I liked it a lot more than that other one. So this is a sapphic YA horror book that takes place on this island called Raxter. And on this island there is a boarding school that's very kind of isolated and remote. And at some point before this book started, girls at this school started to get sick and die, and this kind of mysterious illness has kind of just torn through the school. So we are following Hetty and Byatt, who are best friends, and they are among kind of the few remaining girls at this school. And there are 2 adults left. There's one teacher and the headmistress of the school still alive. And they're all infected, and they're all experiencing these weird symptoms, and there's not enough food, and they're supposed to be in quarantine, so no one from the outside has come to rescue them, and they're receiving these very meager shipments of food from the outside. And otherwise they're just kind of fending for themselves and trying to stay alive. So we start in this horrible, scary situation. And the story really launches when Byatt goes missing. And Hetty will pretty much do anything to try to find her, even if it means breaking quarantine, which is pretty much the biggest and most important rule at Raxter. Honestly, I was really, really impressed with this book. I thought the characters were really good, really compelling. I thought the story was very compelling. This book has a lot of pretty graphic body horror, so keep that in mind, but honestly, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I haven't really read a lot of books with body horror, and I think this one does a really, really good job of that. If you're kind of squeamish, I don't know if you would like it, but I don't know, I thought it added a lot to the kind of grim nature of the story, and ultimately I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was great. I highly recommend it if it sounds like something that you'd like. Last but not least, I read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. So in this book we're following Amira, who is a black babysitter for this white family, and that is very important because at the beginning of the book she's kind of unexpectedly called by this family to take care of their child, kind of in the middle of the night because of a specific incident that has happened, and she's sent with this child to a grocery store. And Amira and the child that she's babysitting are basically killing time at this grocery store, and Amira gets confronted by a security guard at the store and a customer at the store who are kind of convinced that she's kidnapped this child. So the incident is kind of quickly resolved, but the book is really about kind of the white savior complex of 2 people who are tied to this incident. So the first person is a guy who was kind of a bystander as this incident was happening and filmed the incident. And the second person is Amira's boss, the mother of this child. We're following the perspectives of Amira and her boss, and there's not a lot of action in this book. It's very much about kind of the characters and their feelings and their behaviors kind of surrounding this incident. It's also about Amira, who's 25 and doesn't really want to be a babysitter anymore, but she's very, very attached to this child, and they have a very, very close connection, and it's kind of about her trying to figure out what she wants and what her next move is in life and in her career. This book definitely kind of went in a direction that I wasn't expecting it to, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to spoil it, but it definitely just went places I didn't expect it to. And ultimately, it was a good book. Like, I really enjoyed it. I really liked Amira. I thought the connection that she has with the child was really cute. I thought that the mom, the like boss, was very interesting as a character. I haven't read a lot of contemporary books this year, but I thought this was great. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. That is it for the books that I read in November. As usual, I'm going to quickly go over the books that I'm currently reading, just so you have some idea of what will be included in my next wrap-up. I am actually currently reading 3 books, which is unusual. Usually I'm reading 1 on audio and 1 physically at all times. Right now I'm reading 2 physical books and an audiobook, so it's just kind of how it happened. The first book is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I'm like a quarter of the way through this book, and so far I'm absolutely loving it. I think this could be a 5-star book. Normally I don't talk about these books extensively, but I have to say, I think this might make it to the top books of the year. The next book is On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. This is actually a graphic novel, and it's definitely like by far the longest graphic novel I've ever read. It's also very heavy. And the last book that I'm currently in the middle of is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is my first Grady Hendrix book, and I'm also really enjoying this. That brings us to the end of this video. If you're new to my channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. I put 1 bookish video out every week, sometimes 2, if I can pull it off. If you're still here, thank you so much for being here. I always really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.